these mobile money charts look simple, very simple. In fact, at first glance, everything looks completely transparent. But what if I told you, hidden inside these charts are fee traps you can't see with the naked eye? I'm talking about something called cannibalism, where in certain ranges, doing 2 transactions actually costs less than doing 1 single transaction. Yes, you could be paying more than necessary without even knowing it. But before we even get there, let me ask you this. Do you actually understand how these transaction bands relate to each other? For example, how this band relates to this one, or how this band here connects to all these other ones above it? Because the truth is, these bands may, at face value, look independent on these yellow and red charts, but they're actually connected to each other. The transaction fees in each band overlap with those in the bands above and below each band. And that connection is exactly where these hidden fee traps come from. In this video, I'm going to show you exactly how these bands relate to each other, where the cannibalism ranges start and end, and how you can use them to save your hard-earned money when withdrawing cash from an agent. There will be a bit of maths along the way, but don't worry, I'll keep it simple. Feel free to use a calculator or even Excel to follow along and verify the numbers you see on the screen. And since the yellow and red charts are almost the same, I'll use this yellow one for illustration going forward. Now, cannibalism happens across these bands, from here all the way up to here. For example, this band only cannibalizes this one smaller band. So the cannibalism range here runs from 60,001 shillings up to 62,500 shillings. But this next band cannibalizes all these smaller bands up to 60,000. So here, the cannibalism range runs from 125,001 shillings up to 185,000 shillings. This band also does the same. It cannibalizes all these smaller bands up to 125,000. So the range here is from 250,001 shillings up to 375,000 shillings. This next band here is one of the most problematic. It cannibalizes all these smaller bands up to this point, with a maximum cannibalism value of 250,000 shillings. That means for this band, the cannibalism range is very wide, from 500,001 up to 750,000 shillings. These last 3 bands here also behave the same way. Each one of them cannibalizes smaller bands up to 125,000, starting from its lower edge. I'm sure you're starting to see the pattern. So how does this affect your mobile money cash withdrawals? Let's take this band that starts at 500,001 as an example. If you withdraw I repeat, any amount of cash from this band, starting from the lower edge and going up only to the maximum value of the smaller bands it cannibalizes, which in this case is up to 250,000 shillings, you'll end up paying more if you withdraw it as a single transaction than if you split it. Let me show you this blue band on a horizontal line so you can quickly see what I'm talking about. So, any cash withdrawal between 500,001 and 750,000 shillings, that is, the red section I've highlighted on the scale, quietly costs more when you do it as a single transaction than when you split it. Let me show you some practical examples of withdrawals from this cannibalism range, first as a single transaction and then as a split, so you can clearly see the savings. Feel free to pause the video at any point and double-check the maths using your calculator or even an Excel spreadsheet. Let's start with 510,000 shillings. As you can see in the table, withdrawing once costs 15,050 shillings. But when you split it into 500,000 and 10,000 shillings, it only costs 10,250, saving you 4,800 shillings. Now, let's try 550,000 shillings. A single withdrawal costs 15,250 shillings. But when you split it, it saves you 4,000 shillings. Now let's move further along the horizontal scale and try withdrawing 600,000 shillings. A single withdrawal costs 15,500. But when you split it, it saves you 3,575 shillings. Next, let's try 700,000. A single withdrawal costs 16,000 shillings. But when you split it, it costs 14,075, saving you 1,925 shillings. Now let's jump to the upper limit of this cannibalism range, which is 750,000. A single withdrawal costs 16,250. But when you split it into 500,000 and 250,000, it costs 14,325, still saving you 1,925 shillings. Finally, let's try 800,000. This is outside the cannibalism range, as you can see on this horizontal line. As you can see in the table, a single withdrawal costs 16,500. But if you try to split it, it actually costs 18,000 shillings, which is 1,500 shillings more expensive than doing a single transaction. So in this case, a single transaction is the best option. So how do you split your cash withdrawal? First of all, when it comes to splitting, there's a reason why there are so many mobile money agents everywhere you go in this country. I don't have to explain everything. And if you have the Smart Split Calculator app, about 90% of what I'm about to show you is done for you automatically. You can download it from the Google Play Store if you're using Android, or the App Store if you're on an iPhone or iPad. Now let's go step by step. These steps apply to all cash withdrawals, including the ones that we have already discussed in the video. But for this example, we'll use 510,000 shillings. Step 1. Decide which mobile money provider you want to use, yellow or red. In this example, we'll use yellow, but everything I'm showing applies to red as well. Step 2. Identify which band your withdrawal amount falls into. In our case, 510,000 shillings falls into this blue band. Step 3, and this is very important, check whether your amount falls within the cannibalism range. We already defined these ranges earlier. For this example, the cannibalism range for this blue band is any amount between 500,001 and 750,000 shillings, as highlighted here in red on the horizontal scale. So, 510,000 clearly falls within this range. Step 4, identify the anchor band. When splitting manually, one of your transactions must come from the band just above the one you would have used if you were doing a single withdrawal. In this case, that means this band here. And as a rule of thumb, always pick the maximum value of the anchor band. So in our example, we pick 500,000 shillings from this band and use it as the first transaction when splitting the withdrawal. Step 5. Calculate the remaining balance and then withdraw it as your second transaction. This will come from any of the smaller bands up here that this blue band cannibalizes. In our example, the remaining 10,000 shillings falls right here in this band. After the second transaction, you save 4,800 shillings, as shown in the table. Now, if you think back to all the split examples I showed you earlier within this blue band, like this one, or even this one, there's something you probably noticed. The first transaction was always 500,000 shillings, which is the maximum value of the anchor band. And then the second transaction was simply the remaining balance. For example, when we withdrew 550,000, the 500,000 came from this anchor band, and the remaining 50,000 came from this band. The same pattern continues. For 600,000, the remaining 100,000 comes from this band. For 700,000, the remaining 200,000 comes from this band. And finally, for 750,000, the remaining 250,000 comes from this band. Now notice this carefully. For this blue band, once the second transaction reaches 250,000 shillings, which is the maximum value of the bands it cannibalizes, that's where the advantage of splitting ends. In other words, that is where the cannibalism range for this band ends. And that's exactly why splitting didn't help when we tried to split 800,000 shillings, because the second transaction would have been 300,000, which is above that 250,000 limit. So, once the second transaction goes beyond that limit, you lose the benefit of cannibalism. And that's why splitting fails for this amount, since it falls outside the cannibalism range, as you can see on the horizontal scale. Now, as a quick bonus, let's try withdrawing 300,000 shillings, an amount that falls within the cannibalism range, but in a different band on this chart. 300,000 sits within this band here, so a single withdrawal would cost you 8,500 shillings as shown in the table. As you can see, 300,000 also falls within the cannibalism range of this blue band, which I've highlighted in red on the horizontal line. So, we use the band just above this blue band as the anchor band and take its maximum value, 250,000 shillings, as the first transaction. The remaining 50,000 shillings then comes from this band, saving you 1,925 shillings. And remember, if you're using the Smart Split Calculator app, it will automatically suggest these options and even allow you to adjust and explore other combinations, as you can see here. By the way, these savings stay on your mobile money account, so you can use that money for other priorities like data, airtime, and more.